Hi, I'm Taylor Hudak with Activism Munich. We live in increasingly tenuous times and in a world of ever-expanding and pervasive surveillance. Recently, New Zealand is being upheld as a country we should all aspire to be more like. However, that narrative flies in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Whistleblowers have warned us for years that New Zealand is participating in this global creep toward dystopia. In August of 2014, the Snowden NZ revelations rocked New Zealand.
There are actually NSA facilities in New Zealand that the GCSB is aware of, and that means the Prime Minister is aware of, and one of them is in Auckland.
New Zealand is part of the Five Eyes Alliance. It is insiders from within the deep state, as we would call it in political science, collaborating with each other to maximize their own power in this equation. If we look at simply the scale of the activity, we now have a situation where every single person who has access to the internet, which in New Zealand is essentially every single person, is being affected.
One person who has been profoundly and personally impacted by this is investigative journalist Suzie Dawson. A digital native and a trailblazer in the age of citizen journalism, Suzie's plight was recently highlighted in an article by Sean O'Brien, co-founder of the Yale Privacy Lab at Yale University. In his article, he features 5 countries attacking the press, including New Zealand, Suzie's country of origin.
Suzie's case is interesting and I think very accessible and understandable to a lot of folks, roughly from a time period of 2011 to 2015. And she's documented this very, very well. She had a number of incidents that were threats on her safety. Suzie's case shows that someone can be completely harassed, have all kinds of attacks happen to her, be fearful for her own safety, and then have to flee her own home country just to make sure that nothing happens to her family. She's a resident in Russia right now. She's still been doing incredible reporting, doing incredible interviews. In this case, the long arm of the United States reaches into New Zealand.
What would drive a young citizen journalist and mother from the suburbs of Auckland, New Zealand, to seek refuge in Russia? The answer to that question lays in the journey that led her there. That journey started all the way back in 2011. It all began with the global uprising known as the Occupy movement, an unprecedented activism phenomenon that kicked off in September 2011 and within a month grew to 2,000 cities worldwide. The movement broke new ground in the use of social media for collective organizing, coordinating international solidarity actions, fostering independent media, and employing techniques like live streaming and live tweeting in order to break corporate media news blackouts and combat establishment misinformation campaigns. It was in supporting her local and national Occupy groups and becoming a volunteer on their media teams that Suzie Dawson became a journalist. She started the Twitter account @InDarken and began posting about events in Auckland, New Zealand as they unfolded. In the years that followed, Suzie shot live video of more than 50 protest actions in New Zealand and was present at pivotal political moments. Historic footage captured by Suzie is used throughout this documentary, providing us with a window into what she saw exactly as she saw it. Now, these days, Suzie is known for her publishing on her websites, ContraSpin and The Spin Bin, but her long-form journalism also tracks back to Occupy. She co-founded the well-known movement website Occupy Savvy and began microblogging and aggregating news about the movement. Suzie described the sea change Occupy brought to her life in her 2016 documentary, Diary of a Person of Interest.
In 2011, I barely knew what an activist was, but when the Occupy movement started, I couldn't help but join. I could see people all around the world actually found a way to take a stand for themselves and for their communities, and I got on board. My understanding of activism in New Zealand was based on what we were told by human rights lawyers at the very first march on October 15th, 2011. We were told that New Zealanders have the right to dissent, that we have the right to freedom of assembly, to freedom of association, the right to seek redress from our government, and that we could not be discriminated against on the basis of political opinion. I naively took all of that at face value. I thought that would protect me, and I thought that would protect the other occupiers and other members of my media team. We believed and had been told our whole lives, we'd been propagandized that New Zealand was the safest, most peaceful country in the world. Never in a million years did it occur to us that what would happen to us would happen. We found out the hard way that everything I just told you about New Zealand is not true. Our entire media team, and then later an ever-broadening section of society, became aggressively targeted by domestic and international intelligence agencies.
With the benefit of hindsight, it is now a matter of public record that the Occupy movement was extensively targeted by the FBI and other agencies at the behest of the White House. According to Naomi Wolf, writing for The Guardian, FOIA documents showed, quote, Banks sat down with the FBI officials to pool information about OWS protesters harvested by private security, end quote, and planned to, quote, crush Occupy events, end quote. The coordinated global evictions of the Occupy movement stretched as far as New Zealand, where the FBI famously executed an armed raid on New Zealand soil at the mansion house of internet entrepreneur and WikiLeaks donor Kim Dotcom. The raid occurred only 3 days prior to the evictions of Suzie's home occupation at Occupy Auckland. Suzie investigated the FBI presence in New Zealand and broke ground by authoring a long-form article about the United States Security Agency's activities in New Zealand during this period. The article was picked up and published by Occupy Oakland in California, placing her firmly on the radar of the international movement. But that was not all Suzie was doing. She was frequently attending other protest actions in Auckland, documenting excessive policing and intimidation against protesters. In blog posts like this one, Suzie compiled photo, video, and written evidence and eyewitness testimonies of police violence in New Zealand.
I threw my body back into the crowd of people and they pushed me all the way down the street, the whole street, these two men. One of them had no badge number.
No,
I was like, you've got no badge
before.
number, where's your badge number? And then that just made them be even more kind of aggressive. And yeah, they just manhandled me the entire length of Federal Street until I got out to the other end, and then they let me go. And it was not very nice.
We've seen many people have exactly the same situation.
But not as bad as other people. I watched them kick some chick in the head.
So we're here in the park, and these police just came in and grabbed this woman here. Police have locked arms and are walking in an amoeba formation here.
Like 4 cops come in, 2 of them just grab her, and she starts freaking out, and then more and more cops come in and drag her to the ground with such force. They were so violent this whole time, and this massive scuffle just ensued. Everyone came in, and people were trying to
she's so little.
pull her away, and she's tiny. She's this big. She's smaller than me, and they were so rough with her. It wasn't even funny. They were punching people of the general the public that were coming in to try and voice their concern with the way that they were doing this, and of course this big scuffle ensues. Next thing I know, from the I think initially I saw maybe about 10 cops all up. Next thing I know, it's 50 cops down there. So what? They sent 50 cops for one girl and fucking smashed her. And of course, this huge scene in the process.
Just as other journalists who document serious police abuses have themselves been targeted, so too was Suzie Dawson. Her home was broken into, She was surveilled physically and electronically, photographed and harassed in public, and the targeting escalated in severity as time went on. New Zealand activist Jessie Vaudrey recently spoke about eyewitnessing the targeting of Suzie.
Not really being able to imagine properly what that would have been like for Suzie, to have to kind of like have that as like sort of, that's like your kind of daily life, your weekly life, you know?
Despite these hardships, Suzie remained instrumental in promoting political movements and events in New Zealand and beyond, as well as investigating and writing about police, security, and intelligence agencies. In 2013, Suzie was the #1 social media influencer in the GCSB movement, a movement against mass surveillance and unlawful spying on New Zealand citizens by New Zealand's NSA. The same year, she co-founded the hashtag TPPA No Way, a movement against the TPP which trended worldwide.
Already covering several city blocks. Look at all these beautiful people, all saying the same thing. TPPA, no way.
Suzie also coordinated with the Greenpeace Oil-Free Seas campaign and provided live coverage at their events. 2014 heralded a serious escalation in Israel's war on Palestine, and Suzie's work began to be picked up by major international outlets, including her footage of a Palestinian flag being raised above the U.S. consulate in Auckland.
The United States flag has been taken down from the flagpole outside the U.S. Embassy, and a Palestinian flag has been raised in its place.
She wrote about the dirty politics scandal in New Zealand, in which renowned investigative journalist Nikki Hager documented the targeting of New Zealand journalists, activists, and other dissenters by the highest echelons of the New Zealand government. As her profile grew, Suzie began to secure exclusive interviews with famous Kiwi politicians and dissidents. She covered live events at Kim.com's mansion and attended major political events like the Mana Movement annual general meeting, where she interviewed Honey Harawira, a close family friend and comrade of Nelson Mandela, who quoted Malcolm X into Suzie's camera.
By Any Means Necessary is a book written by Malcolm X, and I've always liked that phrase, that when you struggle, you don't struggle politely, you don't ask politely for something that is yours by right. You go and say, this is my right, I'd like to take it back. If you're not prepared to give it back, I'll fucking take it off you. Set aside the protocols of a civilized society, chase that which is yours, stand up for your rights.
When Kim.com launched the Internet Party, Suzie promoted it relentlessly, including the Moment of Truth event featuring Glenn Greenwald, Edward Snowden, Julian Assange, and others. This was when WikiLeaks began sharing Suzie's work and has done so every year since. Suzie's fellow media team member, Kiwi activist Lynn Nye, recently talked about witnessing this time period in Suzie's life.
Suzie's work was of significance because Suzie talked to people who were of significance. She was talking to Kim.com and Honey Harawira and talking about things like Edward Snowden and people who were important and people who were threats to people in power. And that made her very important. She was sharing information from these very high-profile people. So her work was very important here.
By 2015, the targeting of Suzie became so severe that she made the very difficult decision to leave her home country of New Zealand with her 2 young children. She received a normal temporary residency in Berlin, Germany, and continued with her work. Unfortunately, the targeting of her continued as she traveled, and when there were no other options left, Suzie applied for temporary asylum in Russia in 2016. While adjusting to life in Russia, Suzie took a new direction with her journalism, kicking off her Decipher You series, a world-first initiative to study Snowden documents live online. But her work that year did not stop there. She reported unique findings from the Panama Papers New Zealand files, exposing then New Zealand Prime Minister John Key, and wrote about U.S. intelligence efforts to undermine Europe and the Schengen zone, as well as their encouraging France to engage in extrajudicial drone killings of French citizens overseas. In January 2017, Suzie was appointed leader of the Internet Party of New Zealand and contested the New Zealand general election from exile. She went on to create the Anti-Spy Bill series to draft crowdsourced legislation to rein in the abuses of the spy agencies. And despite being a heavily targeted journalist and activist herself, Suzie continually rallied support for the most at-risk journalist of our time, Julian Assange. In 2018, she authored Being Julian Assange, a 24,000-word epic study of the true history of WikiLeaks that was heavily promoted by Julian himself. She then co-founded Unity4J, a broad-based transnational movement in solidarity with the WikiLeaks founder. Suzie made a multitude of media appearances to advocate for Assange, including on Lee Camp's Redacted Tonight on RT America.
Julian is an agent of change, and truth is his only weapon, and he used truth to bring us change.
She also appeared in multiple segments on The Jimmy Dore Show, whose YouTube channel has more than 750,000 subscribers.
I believe that saving the life of Julian Assange is to save the life of other at-risk journalists and whistleblowers for decades to come.
In December 2018, a State Services Commission report confirmed that up to a dozen New Zealand government departments had been contracting a private investigation firm to target New Zealand organizations and citizens, including Suzie's political party and the movement she had been involved in. The private company involved was Thompson & Clark Investigations Limited, the very same company Suzie had been naming since 2012, some 6 years earlier. According to police FOIA documents, Thompson & Clark operate a fusion center in New Zealand. Fusion centers use governmental, corporate, private, and open source data to enhance targeting operations for both state and international clients. This confirmation that Suzie had been right all along opened the first real window for her to attempt to gain redress for the destruction of her and her children's lives. Subsequently, Suzie launched the One vs. 5i campaign and video series, where she analyzed the Snowden J-Trig files live online with clinical psychologist Lissa K. Johnson, further exposing the methods used by intelligence agencies to psychologically target and destroy citizens worldwide. In light of what Suzie warned of all along coming true, it is important now more than ever to help support her in her quest to resolve her situation favorably. As things stand, she remains in limbo in Moscow, unable to earn money locally, and with a very unclear future. The merits of her case for asylum is discussed in exclusive footage we obtained from a 2019 meeting between Suzie and her Russian attorney.
My name is Igor Kraslovsky. I've been representing Suzie Dawson on her asylum application here in Russia when it was 2016, when we just met. After a while, we decided to apply for asylum. If a plain person would look into the case file, he or she would find that there are enough evidence to at least seriously consider.
Igor, what is the difference between my current application and my original application?
Well, your original application was made mostly only by your words, without enough evidence, and now there is a change in situation. And second, there are a bunch of high-profile individuals who step forward and give their testimonies regarding your case, explaining why you are a target, why you are being a target, and all your associations.
Top New Zealand counterterrorism specialist Jeremy Bioletti spoke about his support for Suzie and why he believes she must be supported.
It was no surprise whatsoever to me, based on my experience of Operation 8 and the type of surveillance that occurred there, that she would be a target.
Now, is this a common thing to happen in New Zealand to activists and journalists?
Unfortunately, it is. She's a fantastic journalist. She works extremely hard and she writes articles which are incredibly well researched. So she's a really in-depth journalist. And there's so few of those left, so few. You know, it's really important that people support her.
Suzie has mentored other activists and journalists, and her work has inspired many. Alex Hills, co-founder of Free Assange NZ, spoke about what Suzie's work meant to her.
You know, one of the reasons that I got into activism was purely because of what I'd seen through Suzie and the role model that she'd given me there. I sat down for a very long time to read Being Julian Assange. It was an epic piece of work. I can only thank Suzie Dawson. It feels good to be doing something for your children and for free press and just for the world, really, doesn't it?
In December 2019, the Protect Suzie campaign was launched to help support Suzie and her children during this tenuous time. ProtectSuzie.com contains comprehensive information about the targeting of Suzie, her work, and her situation, and what supporters can do to help. The website includes letters of testimony from high-profile figures, including Christine Assange, mother of Julian Assange, ex-CIA torture whistleblower John Kiriakou, and Kim.com. Each of them ratifies Suzie's claims and request that she be protected. Right now, you can help protect this brave journalist and her young family by signing the open letter, which calls on relevant international bodies and non-governmental agencies to take immediate action to endorse and preserve Suzie's human rights. Suzie Dawson shines bright lights on really important and often dangerous subjects. Not all of us have the courage to do the same. But by having her back, spreading the word about her situation and rewarding her sacrifices, we can help push back the darkness. Recently, much of the world has gotten a taste of isolation, loneliness, and uncertainty about their future. In lockdown in Moscow, with only her children and their puppy for company, Suzie is in her 5th year of inability to travel or see her family or home, and is experiencing a profound and lasting social isolation. Her principled stands for democracy and for us all cost her nearly everything. Despite this, she continues to advocate for others, and that is precisely why we must advocate for her.